Hiya and welcome to this week's episode of Inside Property Development, where we're speaking with Saam Lowni from Merry Oaks Property Finance. Sam,
Paul,
thanks for coming.
thank you for having me.
So before we start, let's give us a little bit of a CV about how you first got into property and then building up to what you're doing now.
So I, growing up, always wanted to be an estate agent from the age of 10.
Jesus.
That's what a lot of people say. And so, yeah, I always imagined I'd be in property in some way, shape or form, and either an estate agent or a property developer. Those two things perked my interest from a very young
Hang on,
age.
just out of interest, right? So before we get onto that, why? No offense to estate agents, by the way, but do you know what I mean? What was it that attracted you to that?
So my parents used to buy 2 up, 2 downs in County Durham in the northeast back in the 80s, back when the average house price was £80,000. These were buying them for like £2,000 and then selling them for £4,000, £5,000, £6,000. These days, these same properties are worth like £50,000, £60,000.
Yeah.
And doing those refurbs, I then went to school. My best friend, his dad was an estate agent, and he had a chain of estate agents that he sold in the early 90s to one of the insurance companies for quite a lot of money. And he had the biggest house, and he had a nice Lotus Elan. He had a Beamish rally car. He used to take us to Newcastle United, sit us in the Platinum Club, take us to the Lake District for like bike rides and stuff. And he was just a lot of fun. He'd come home, he'd have these big train sets and TVs and sofas from his rental properties that he'd have. And I just thought, out of all my friends, that's the coolest dad. And if he's in property and my parents are doing that and they would encourage me, then I'll do that. An estate agency, my parents, everywhere we went, whether it would be to London regularly just to go for outings or go abroad, even go to Spain or something, we'd just go and have a look at houses. And I'd see how these estate agents operated. And I was never great at school. I was like probably bang average C. And I knew that if you're an estate agent, you get to dress nicely, you get to sit in an office, and you get to get out the office from time to time, go and drive a nice car, see nice houses. So putting all of that together, I was like, that's the life for me.
Interesting. We're not going to talk about estate agency, although it will be a whole nother show, actually. Now you mention that, I'll get an estate agent in because the whole world of estate agency is changing big time. In terms of the model, isn't it?
100%. Yeah, the US model's coming over here. I think a lot of the old-fashioned high street agents are going to morph into what I call super agents, which is like individual brands. And yeah, it works in the US pretty well, but we're still a little bit behind here.
Interesting. What happened then?
I had to go to university, study business. That's kind of what I wanted to. There's no degree in estate agency, so I had to do something similar. And my dad was in business as well. So anyway, I moved to London from the Northeast, and I was told by my parents that had a lot of influence in my career and my life. They said, nobody wants a business graduate with no work experience, so go and get a job. So I just literally said, right, I'll be an estate agent. I wrote up my CV out. Nobody would give me a job initially because I was studying full-time, wanted to work part-time. But I wrote on the bottom, P.S. I will work for free in pencil. And suddenly my little Nokia started ringing, and I got a few offers. And I was in East London. I chose the largest office in Walthamstow. I thought, that looks like they're doing well. And initially I worked for free. So Fridays, Saturdays, Mondays. And it was stapling property lists together. There was no computers on desks at that time. It was all applicant cards. I would get teas, coffees, lunches for people. Then slowly but surely, I would register people, then arrange viewings, then conduct viewings, and then make sales. And after 3 months, they gave me a part-time job on an hourly rate. It was about £3.81 an hour. It was like minimum wage at the time. And I loved it. I absolutely loved it. And I ended up working full-time and studying part-time. I started doing well for myself, making some cash. And whilst I wanted to go and blow it all in Ibiza with my buddies, my old man said, don't do that. Give it to your mum to hide under a pillow and save it, or go and buy a property. So I decided I'm going to go and buy a property with it. So bought a property, flipped it, and then my parents bought a bunch of cash down from the northeast, and we started doing that across North and East London together.
So we'll get on. I think a lot. We'll talk a lot about what you're doing now in the world of property finance and stuff like that, particularly development finance. Because
yes,
it's about inside property development. That's really good, and it's excellent to have actually knowledge and experience of doing it. I.e., that even if it's small scale development stuff, refurbs, flips, and things like that, because that means you really get it. And there's so many, really getting it is massively important because, there's a lot of people out there doing things, selling things, teaching things, talking about things that haven't really been there, seen it, done it, and they're never going to be as good, are they, as people that have.
I started small, and I was always thinking big. So yeah, the one little refurb, 1-bedroom flat, then it was side extensions, rear extensions, loft conversions, then houses into flats. There's a lot of that going on in North and East London and Hackney and Haringey. And we did a commercial conversion as well, all before any kind of PD. There was a vinegar factory Muse development in Hackney Wick that we did, and we demised the roof. And since then, approaching the Olympics, we managed to get another unit on top. So yeah, never was a huge into development because I was never good at construction and I was never good on site. I used to do all the manual labor stuff like painting and decorating, or just even shoveling stuff from collecting the rubbish, basically filling up black bin bags. But I never really took an interest on like how to hang a door or build an architrave or do the wiring or anything like that. At one point, I did actually think about maybe I should do some plastering. And my dad looked at me and goes, "Mate, with those risks, you're not going to last 5 minutes. Don't even bother."
It's not the sort of thing you want to be doing if you don't know how to do it, is it?
Exactly. So he was like, "Look, just stay in the office, like learn that side of things. As an estate agent, you learn the exit part of development, so sales, lettings, property management, and portfolio building." And just stay close to the numbers. Just make sure that you're buying stuff at the right price, how much you're going to spend on it, and what you can sell it for. And because again, I was an estate agent, I had good intel on that sort of thing, and I had good deal flow as well. Because back in those days, before Rightmove and Zoopla existed, a lot of the deals were coming from branch managers and valuers in estate agencies.
I'll tell you what, that's a really interesting point, because there will be people, newer people to this industry that don't actually realise that. I mean, how it is now, so much information, data everywhere, relatively easy to get hold of. I don't know when you first started, but there was a time when the only way you could get comps was to talk to estate agents.
Yeah.
So, 25, 30 years ago, when I was a land buyer for the big developers and you're looking at a site, I would literally have to go round into estate agents' offices, chatting them up and saying, "Oh, well, I'm looking at a site or thinking about looking at a site locally. What do you reckon 3-bed houses would sell for?" And blah, blah, blah. And it was really the only way you could get the information. They had the information.
That was a large part of the influence on me to really want to go into development more so than estate agency. After a while, sitting in a shop window on a high street, going back and forth and watching the world go by in front of you, I did get itchy feet. And I always see the developers come in the middle of the day, leave in the middle of the day. They always had the nicest cars. And you'd see how much money they'd make as well, how much they were buying something for. And in those days, well, between 2001, 2008, the market was just rising anyway. So with very little work or very vanilla refurbs, they'd be making an absolute fortune. So that really caught my attention. I thought, wow, let me explore how this goes. Because they were coming in and they were saying, right, I've got this building. I'm going to carve it up into this and this. What's it worth? Surveyors doing the same thing as well, calling us up saying, right, we're doing an evaluation down the road. Can you give us some comparables? That used to happen regularly, daily.
Did you become a developer?
I got Facebook and Facebook groups and a lot of controversy about pretenders and this, that, and the other. And I would say I developed property, yes. Whether it was on the smaller scale though, everything kind of sub 1 million, let's call it. Because before 2008 in London, a flat would cost about £100,000. Now it's about £500,000. And that's the kind of stuff that we were doing initially, all the smaller stuff. Post 2010, 2015, when I picked up again and started doing it again, trying to operate in that space, which I consider relatively low risk, not that much can go wrong. If something goes drastically wrong, it's not going to completely wipe me out. And that's how it was always my mindset. I didn't really generally want to completely like go all in and
This
do
is
it.
with like smaller refurbs and things like that.
Yeah, exactly. So with the development stuff, what I consider is, are you going to add value through some sort of construction or planning? And if you're doing that, then, and you're getting a change of use, or you're getting, you're adding square footage, then for me, that constitutes property development. It's just the scale of what you're doing. Are you doing it in the commercial sector? Are you doing it in the residential sector? Are you doing it with, high rises, or are you doing little HMOs? So absolutely, I'd consider myself a property developer, but certainly on the smaller scale.
So you're not doing that anymore?
So over the last 10 years, so since 2015, I refinanced the portfolio. 2008 was a tough time for me because I did a lot of soul searching.
It's a tough time for everyone for a lot of reasons.
Yeah, exactly. Came out unscathed, certainly. And actually, I thought it was going to be the worst depression since 1929, and it was going to get, World War III was going to kick off. So I really, really, and all my income from estate agency and everything, because the volume.
Let's talk about that a bit, actually, because again, unless people were sort of there in business, particularly in property and particularly in property development, in 2008, they might not understand quite how bad things were. So how did that sort of affect? So obviously, most people, younger people, might not know. 2008 was the global financial crisis.
Yes,
as it's called, where, amongst other things, basically the banks run out of money.
The credit crunch.
Yeah, the credit crunch. So how did that affect you? And sorry, and it's important to talk about this because, again, people forget, particularly people that have only seen good markets, that shit like this can happen. And it does happen, and it will happen, and it always happens.
Exactly. Boom bust happens. And I think that's why I had to do some soul searching, because I bought into what I was told from the media and from our politicians, and Gordon Brown in particular, when he famously said the days of boom and bust were over. I started my career in London in 2001. I was 18 years old, and 1997 was when Blair came in. I actually went to the same school that Tony Blair went to when he was a kid. So I used to kind of look up to this guy, that he was some sort of hero and things can only get better and all that. There was this whole euphoria around it. And literally, we were walking on money. Everything we were touching turned to gold. It was just absolutely brilliant time to be alive. And Gordon Brown said the days of boom and bust were over. So I thought, this is easy street, and I'm going to be a multimillionaire without any worries in the not too distant future. 2008 soon put a stop to that, and I had to go away and find out. I'd studied economics at A-level, so I thought I knew a little bit, and I knew about these boom bust cycles, but evidently politicians don't always tell you the truth, and what ended up happening was there wasn't any capital in the market. People couldn't get money for mortgages, loans for mortgages, and transactions slowed down. So whilst you're an estate agent, you need people to be buying and selling so you can clip a fee.
Okay, so you were in the estate agency at that time.
Yeah.
I mean, I suppose if all of a sudden there's no business, that's not good. But you weren't in the middle of a load of development stuff or anything like that.
No, the only development that we had, these were all small things. So it was, and we'd sell a few, and if we couldn't sell it for whatever reason, which was very rare, but at the end we just rented it out. And we'd keep the ones that we kind of liked. There was the vinegar factory. That's quite unique. There's a nice corner plot. We kept those ones. Anything that was a little bit run of the mill, we just sold those ones, flipped them, built up a little cash pot, whilst also holding on to the more unique properties. So we weren't massively overstretched, and we'd always put a little bit of cash in. So we weren't getting these kind of 110% mortgages, albeit we were maybe going up to kind of 90%, putting very little equity in relatively. But what happened in 2008 also saved us a little bit, because we were on these lifetime tracker mortgages, and they went down to nearly zero. I think it was like 0.1 or 0.25. So our monthly repayments were very, very low. At the same time, because there was very few transactions in the market for sale, everybody was renting, and rents went through the roof. So suddenly we had this huge profit margin at the end of every single month. And it was my wise old man, and certainly my prudent mother, who decided that, you know what, on all these properties, we're not going to live off that cash flow. We've kind of done well. You're still young. You go out and find some cash from somewhere else, go and work, do something. And with that money, we're going to just pay the loans off. And the faster we pay the loans off, then the banks can't come after us, and we'll hopefully own it, and we hopefully won't go through another blitz where it all gets bombed to zero. So that's what we did. So by 2015, in fact, the market bounced back. Some of them have gone up 5-6 times in value. So some of these flats are like worth £100,000 now, worth 500,000, £700,000, and all completely paid off. So we were sitting pretty at the end of it.
Very good.
Lucky. I think a bit of dumb luck and hard work, obviously, getting up every day doing this stuff, but a bit of dumb luck that didn't kind of take us for a ride.
Very good. So 2015 sort of onwards then, things changed. You got into other stuff.
Yeah, so I actually moved out to Hong Kong for 5 years. I was building food, beverage, hospitality businesses out there, whilst managing the portfolio and watching it kind of be paid off. I was just seeing how the market was going to shift. Was it going to get worse? Was it going to get better? I was making my own cash and learning a little bit more about life and economics. And overall, everything had gone well. My parents were a little bit older and retired. I was doing well out there, but in my mind, I always remembered that I wanted to be an estate agent. I wanted to be in property. And far from the world going to shit, actually, things had largely improved. The Olympics, for example, in London, especially around where all these properties were, had seen huge regeneration. And I just thought, actually, if I can, and the properties have paid off, there's all this equity sitting there. If I could refinance that portfolio and go again, do the same thing, I'll move back to London and spend more time with my family. And that's literally what I did. And it was great. So we could have sold all the units, but then we would have been hit with huge capital gains tax. And somebody else told me as well, never sell the crown jewels. If this is kind of like your wealth, try not to sell them. Hang on to them as long as you can. But the key was high yielding income producing assets. That was the thing that I needed. I kind of deciphered that I need to go after. And the reason being is because the interest rate from 2008 to 2015, or all the way up to 2020 in the end, stayed around that 0.1, 0.25. So it's only going to go one way. And eventually, if you don't have a high yielding income producing asset, you are going to get caught out. So I spent about a year and a half after I got back searching the market, going literally all over the country, back up to the northeast where I grew up, to the northwest, where there's even the valleys in Wales where there's like high yielding properties, looking for what I was going to do. And the most common strategy was HMOs and short lets, kind of service accommodation stuff. And I just decided that HMOs would play to my strengths, having been an estate agent, understanding lettings and property management and being a landlord. And I could find little houses, freehold houses that were 3 beds, turn them into 4, 5, 6 bedroom, under permitted development, where Article 4 wasn't a thing. And when the interest rates would rise, I would still, at least if I didn't have a profit margin, I'd still be able to keep up with repayments. And hopefully over the long term, over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, which I always take that kind of property as a marathon, not a sprint view, I would be able to see some capital growth as well, where these properties would double in value as they've done previously. So that was the strategy, that was the methodology. And so far, touch wood, it's actually worked out all right, because inflation was a thing when they pumped loads of money into the system for COVID, and which I saw coming a mile off when they did it. Interest rates went up to try and keep it under control. And yeah, all my mortgage payments have gone up. But fortunately, because I've got these high yielding income producing assets, I've been able to keep up repayments and still make a profit margin after all deduction of all costs, including maintenance. So it's all fortunately worked out just about well enough. And now I've moved them from, initially it was students. I grew up in Durham, around Durham University. The student cycle is very predictable. But that's changed and evolved over time. They've changed the visa rules. So student attendance has dropped. So I've had to move it then to professionals, and then short lets to keep the yield in a good place. And now it's going to social housing. So constantly evolving as well. It's not like, we've just, given it to one set of tenants and it's worked out. There's a constant asset management that you've got to do as well along the way.
On to now then, or more recently.
Yes. So whilst I was doing that, whilst I was building the portfolio across Kent, the West Midlands and the Northeast, and in around London, I'd done a few flips. These high yielding things were the things that were what I was focused most on. Once I'd found them, and I did like 550 appraisals to find the first like flurry of few deals. I don't like being on site. I don't really enjoy being there all day, every day. I don't mind going there on a Friday, doing evaluation, paying everybody, all of that sort of stuff. But once that's done, there's not much more for me to do, really. So I had to busy myself, and like the capital was deployed, I had to busy myself with something else. And at the time, I'd thought that actually I want to do larger scale developments. That's makes sense. That's over the last 20 years. Probably I've done more development than I've done even a state agency or anything else, because over the long period between 2010, I hadn't done any. So I thought, let me do that, and let me find somebody that was a more experienced than me and had more capital than me. And that way, even if we go bigger, we're not necessarily going to get wiped out, and certainly I can avoid a few of the pitfalls.
And that was to work for or work with or partner with.
I was always thinking partner with, because I thought I'd bring a level of experience, I'd bring a level of credibility, I'd bring a level of resources as well. And I thought if I find somebody a little bit more older, more mature, not mature, but certainly experienced.
Actually, I just remembered now. We spoke, didn't we?
We definitely did, yeah.
Mate, you should have come and worked with me.
Honestly,
that would have been good.
That would have been good.
But anyway,
so
you didn't.
Yeah. So I it's funny how life takes you in different directions.
Yeah.
Because the person that I ended up finding, that I thought, okay, we could probably make something work here. He was looking for somebody else to work with in some capacity at that time. So, as the worlds collide. But he had a slightly different idea. He was not from this country initially. And he decided that actually, for me to really do development in the same way that he'd done previously, which was to a very large scale, he would need time on his hands, and he hadn't. He's in his late years. But what he could do to scale faster was provide the capital, because to be a developer, let's be honest, you need to know your local area. You need to know who the landowners are as best you can. Know what sites are coming up, where there might be distress. You need to know the local planning laws. You got to have the patience to be able to take things through planning as well. So if you might need 2-3 years to take something of a reasonable size through planning, and then the construction on top. Like a good development might take you 2, 3, 4 years.
Just for some of the people listening, because there'll be some people thinking like they think about getting into development, or they're at an early stage and all the rest of it. That is one model you've just mentioned. There are others. Just worth mentioning. People think, oh, I don't like the sound of that. There are other ways of doing it as well.
For example,
well, you could just my whole model is spotting 100% off market stuff.
Yes.
And adding maximum planning value. And when people get good at that, you could flip stuff. You don't have to build stuff.
You don't have to build it out.
Interestingly. When you were talking earlier about all the building bit where you don't like being on site, actually, you don't have to be either. There are ways of not getting involved in any of that, even if you are building stuff,
So let's talk about that very interestingly, because the thing was, option agreements and going direct to that. I did like the concept of that. And I think I spoke to you about that as well. And I did do one particular site. I actually didn't buy it. I didn't do it direct to vendor. I didn't do it off market, but I did buy one site, and I thought, let me take it through planning. And I ended up losing £20,000 on it. I found that the planning system is really, really difficult, because there's a lot of subjectivity, and that what they say to you isn't necessarily. I mean, look, there's planning policy, but then there's a little bit of opinion from different people. I was told by a transport officer and a planning officer that actually, if you do this, this, and this, even though the scheme in this area requires a 1-to-1 policy, car to apartment, car to unit, you'll be able to get it. And we can design because it's literally in a town centre. It's got buses going right across it. It's got a train station 5 minutes down the road. It's got a park right there. You don't really need a car in this location. And if we build a bike, and the transport officer was a big cyclist enthusiast, as I am.
Yep.
And so anyway, he told me, if you build this bike shed and everything else, then we'll recommend it for approval. After 2 years and one failed planning application before the second one, They said, no, actually, needs to be a 1-to-1 ratio because that's the local policy. And I was like, oh my God, I've spent 2 years doing this. So even the planning can take a while. And we just didn't have that on our side. And you can put a lot of cash into these deals. I mean, if you put options, you're burning. It's not cheap to do a planning application if you do it properly as well, right?
Right. Yeah.
So I just thought I need to find somebody like yourself that I can mitigate a lot of that risk. So I was willing to take the risk, but I just needed to find the right person to do it. The right person to do it in the end said, I don't want to take any of that risk because I don't even know what I'm doing. I don't know planning policy and I don't know any of that stuff. Not right now, not in this country. But what I can do is pool large sums of money together. And for those people that are in a place that have done all of the negotiation with the landowner, they've already secured the site, they already know what the construction costs are going to be because they've got local trades in the area and they've done it before, this, that, and the other. Then we can back those people and we can provide capital into the marketplace and we could be on site with our hoarding, funds by or, funded by X. So, and we can be across the country within the next 12 months.
I'll tell you what, this is really interesting because everyone's got a different view on things and a different model and a different way of doing things, right? And who's to say who's right and who's wrong? My way of thinking about things has been eventually, when I sort of come to this conclusion or realization through a lot of, mistakes and experience and what have you, my model is and thinking is that I need to find 100% off market sites.
Yeah.
So you don't get involved in stupid competition, bidding the price up before you've even started. And then you have to know how to add maximum planning and design value, right? So that's the conclusion I came to. And that's been my way of doing things, right? And trying to make myself an expert in that stuff. There are other people out there, particularly in this is my opinion, the bullshit world of Facebook and gurus and all that sort of stuff that bang on about creating a brand and getting hold of the money and stuff like that, right? Which, and I'm not saying that's what you were doing or this bloke was doing or whatever, but that is like that for me, in my view, that is like completely the wrong end of the telescope. It's like, you're getting involved in, you can make yourself look good with the brand. You can go and get other people's money or some other money or however you do it, but you don't actually know enough about the nuts and bolts detail of creating the value. And I've got to say this, and that's where I think most so-called developers come unstuck.
100%. And so the big difference here is whether you're going to be on the debt or the equity side. So although I'd borrowed money and I'd used bridging finance and I'd used term loans and buy-to-let, and I understood all that side of things, I certainly wasn't that deep into the world of finance to know how it works. So I had a steep learning curve. But ultimately, the whole point of being on the equity side is you're in the first loss position. And if you don't know what you're doing and you go and build this beautiful brand and you go out and just secure any old site from any estate agent shop window and pay any money for it, get into bidding wars and just get overly excited, you can't sit on your hands in an auction and you overpay for stuff, then absolutely it's a recipe for disaster and you'll have you make a big splash and drown pretty quickly. Being on the debt side, there was a little bit more of a downside protection, if you call it that.
And sorry, and so this, and I know what it is and who it was and the whole story, but I won't, you might not want to talk details, right? So this was debt that you were doing with these people.
Yeah. I don't mind talking about it. It was it's a company that's still alive today. It's Hilltop Credit Partners. They've evolved into Hilltop Capital Partners, so they're also doing a little bit of advisory. And we used to try to fund a stretch senior piece. So it was up to 90% LTC, 75% LTGDV. So we would help developers that didn't have lots of equity to do developments. We would try to minimize that by giving them extra debt. Now, is that a prudent thing to do? Well, yes and no. If you know what you're doing and you're in a rising market, it's a good thing to do because you're going to maximize your returns. If you don't know what you're doing and you are in choppy waters in an unstable economy, which we probably mostly are in at any point in time, it can be high risk, high reward, but also high losses. So but again, we're all adults, right? So the people that are signing up to this, at the end of the day, if they don't take it from this particular lender, they'll take it from somebody else. Retrospectively, coming to think of it, and knowing what I do now over 20 years and seeing how developers have developed, and even just over the last few years post COVID, it's evident why the big PLC house builders they put loads of equity in, because it just lowers their risk and it allows them to stay around longer. It doesn't. It's a lot more harder for SME property developers to have that level of cash and that level of equity, though. So they, one way or another, take a little bit more risk just to try and get themselves into the game.
Well, hang on. There's another thing.
Yeah,
it's worth mentioning because again, so one of the reasons for this whole podcast is I personally I'm really interested in supporting and encouraging and educating and regrowing the SME house building industry, and making sure everyone else involved in the sector, planners, architects, all sorts of people, and policymakers in particular, really get it and understand the issues and the problems, because it's really not easy, particularly at the moment. Yeah. And I worked for the house builders for 10 years, and the reason I asked you the question about you went to work with someone experienced to get the knowledge and experience, that's basically what I did. What I did, I came to realize it's like, shit, man, this is complicated, right? I'm going to go and work with a big developer to learn how it really works. But one of the reasons, well, actually the big ones have survived is because they're big, right? And actually they've ended up having, because the industry is so difficult. So, and we'll get a little chart up on this, because I'll talk about this a lot. People that have listened to this for a while will probably get bored with it, actually, this bit. But the HBF, the Home Builders Federation, so the main body, let's call it, for the house building industry, but also the Federation of Master Builders and NHBC and other people like that, have all done like various surveys and things over the years into the biggest barriers to growth for SME developers and house builders, and try to work out what the issues and the problems are. Yeah. Now, this is interesting because one of them relates to finance. But anyway, in terms of all of these charts and things like that, the peak of SME house builders and developers, when there was most of them around, was in 1988. Yeah. And since then, we'll show the chart. Yeah, it's massively, massively declined. Yeah. One of the main reasons for that, well, actually, when we get onto finance, most of these surveys that have been done into like asking all the smaller developers what's the biggest problems, it's typically 40% say it's land issues, 40% say it's planning issues. Now, land and planning is basically the same thing, really. It's all linked, right? And 20% say it's issues with finance. Yeah, and then we'll come on to that in a minute, because I know that's your main area of expertise now. But basically, what happened? Those are the issues for all developers, not just the big ones and the small, the small ones. All developers, including the big ones. Land and planning is still actually the main problem. Right? Now finance is actually becoming much more of a problem than it ever was, and that's we'll get onto that. But basically, what happened historically, it got so difficult for everyone. The bigger house builders started buying the smaller house builders just to get hold of their land. Yeah. So two things. The smaller house builders was seriously squeezed, that you couldn't afford to be getting refused planning as it got difficult, or spending ages waiting for planning or and stuff like that. So they were under massive pressure, and at the same time the big guys were as well. So they ended up buying all the small house builders. Yeah. And interestingly, and that has continued, and that's one of the main reasons why there aren't very many small house builders anymore. That's actually continued, and it's even got to the point now whereby not so long ago, you've got Barratt and Redrow actually effectively merging. Because even the biggest of the big have had to consolidate to get economies of scale and stuff like that. So you imagine what it's like for the small guys at the opposite end of the scale.
So one of the quick questions though. So my understanding, and you correct me if I'm wrong, if the generally speaking, the larger house builders, especially the PLCs, are well capitalized.
Yes.
And when they do a development project, their LTV can be sub 50%, because they put in so much over their own cash. And then because they also go to, let's say, the high street bank because their LTV is so low,
Yeah.
they'll get like the lowest of the lowest rate.
Yeah.
And that's one of their ways to mitigate any elongated sales periods, any rising build costs, any slow periods that can, like holding costs can cripple a developer.
Absolutely.
Especially if you're going up high up the LTV curve.
Absolutely.
And with the whole high LTGDV facilities that are out there, whether it be a stretch senior or whether it be a senior mezz, and we do a lot of that stuff, let's be honest. I've seen people do really well out of it, and I've seen people really get suffocated because they've got no exit and they get repossessed. So
it's not easy. So just to tell you the rest of the answer to that question, right? So yeah, absolutely, the big developers have got much cheaper finance. Yeah, of course they've got typically cheaper development costs because they've got economies of scale and they can buy way cheaper than smaller developers. But, and this is the important thing, they do know what they're doing. Do you know what I mean? So honestly, that is a key thing where with a lot of small developers, they don't know what they don't know, and therefore they do make mistakes.
I mean, it's so difficult though because you've got to fall over to get back up again. You've got to make some mistakes. You got to just go through it and do it. My philosophy, the only way to mitigate it really is to start small, think big, and again be well capitalized. Like that's the only, if you really want to make a long-term career out of property development, and that includes the construction phase, end to end, you've just got to be really well capitalized and take low LTV loans and start small so you can make a lot of the small mistakes that don't wipe you out, and hopefully you can scale up slowly but surely. I think it's one of these things that a lot of people think that they can go and do like a multi-unit, freehold block of £10 million GDV. They might be worth a few £1 million as well. They might have done well out of another business or something, and they just want to kind of dive head first. And I've seen those either never get off the ground in the first place because they've just, as they start to scratch the surface, realize, oh my God, I don't actually know what I'm doing. And there's a lot more cost than I initially thought that I put in my spreadsheet. Or they end up doing it and the costs spiral out of control, and certainly there's no profit at the end, and hopefully they'll get their equity back at the very least. So yeah, I mean, but then you've got the agent side as well, the land agents. They're telling these landowners what they want to hear, which is, we always talk about your site's worth £1 million, regardless of like what it is. And somebody gets their build costs wrong on their spreadsheet. Somebody gets their GDV a bit too much optimistic because they've gone down to a local agent and the agent's told them whatever they want to hear. And eventually, somehow it gets through the system because they'll eventually go to a surveyor for a lender. That surveyor agrees to it because of this comp or that comp. And still, it just doesn't quite materialize in the way that it should do. But you know what? For me, you got to do it for the love of it. You've got to be passionate about this stuff. Otherwise, any human being would just give up. And there's no risk without reward, though. Or there's no reward without risk, I should say. So yeah, I think as long as you're passionate and as long as you're willing to take those risks, I think there are huge rewards doing property development. And you just got to take the rough with the smooth.
You have, absolutely, yeah. I think they have good points. It is high risk, high reward. So people need to know that. Don't think it's not. And you do need to know what you're doing, really, if you want to properly de-risk things. Historically, what happens is even when people don't know what they're doing or they make a bit of a mistake, the market gets them out of the shit.
Yeah. That's
until it doesn't, right? Because the market doesn't always go up, and that's, trust me, I've literally seen it. Probably about 4 or 5, downturns and crashes and stuff like that. And the same thing happens every time. All of the smaller, newer, less experienced developers, the ones that did 1, 2, 3 deals while the market was getting them out of the shit, and then they, think they're geniuses. Then the market stops going up.
Yeah.
And it doesn't get them out of the shit. And then they go bust and disappear. And that's it. And a few years later, when it picks up again, a whole new wave comes in. Seriously,
that's literally that's exactly it. Yeah.
That's exactly what happens. So to survive long term and really know what you're doing, you have got to know what you're doing. And even then, it's tricky and it's risky, and that's why the gap between big developers and small developers and has grown so much. Particularly, I mean, the last few years has been really hard,
Painful.
even for the ones that are experienced, because you've had massively rising development costs, obviously increasing interest rates, and a fairly flat market in terms of end values.
Yeah.
So not only, would the market not get you out of the shit in terms of end values going up, development costs have gone up. I talk a lot to a lot of different people about this in terms of what they think the percentage is, and I suppose it depends what it is and where it is. But so I reckon, and there will be data, and you could, it's probably gone up 40% over the last 4 or 5 years, I reckon.
Build costs.
Well, if you look at total development costs in terms of finance
average,
and all the rest, it may be closer to 30. But now for people that have bought sites with planning, right?
No,
So, i.e., they've already paid top dollar, or they've made mistakes and they've tied stuff up at the wrong price. Then, of course, development costs have gone up massively, and the market hasn't got them out the shit.
Yeah. I've got some passionate people, and enthusiastic, and experienced, and they've all just found it very, very difficult. The people that actually have probably done the best are the ones that have taken on sites, got the planning, and then just flipped it on. They're still doing okay in the grand scheme of things, because again, people just. There was one. I arranged a bridging loan for a client who has landward development in South London. He had 4 houses on it, and we got it valued for 850. That's what the value. That's what the developer wanted. We looked at his.
So hang on. So this is interesting. Someone got planning for something, and they
good experienced developer.
They thought it was worth 850, or they wanted 850.
They wanted 850, but they also had a residual land value calculation, so we could see. I was going to send it to one of our surveyors that we work well with, and he said, "Yeah, there's a comp here. It's all in the right ballpark." And we managed to get a lender also to agree. Happy days. However, before we were able to complete, he'd actually found a buyer that bought it off him for 1.15 million.
It happens all the time. That we've spoken about this before, yeah? Planners and policy makers, I think, in particular, and people understanding this, because this is a big part of the problem, particularly for smaller developers, right? So, historically, interesting actually, I was telling you earlier about all those little house builders and stuff like that, and developers. So most of them back in before in the 80s, they were good builders, good contractors, used to build 1, 2, 5, 20, 50 houses a year, right? They were good builders, right? And planning got so complicated and difficult that being a good builder, that just wasn't enough. Didn't matter how good a builder you were, and actually it's still the same now, to be honest, right? Doesn't matter how good a builder you are, if you've not got the right land and the right planning at the right price, just being a good builder is not gonna get you out of the shit. It's not gonna be enough, yeah? But of course, there are people that are good at building, and they want to build and they want to develop and stuff like that. They don't know enough about the land and planning bit, so they just buy sites with planning, which I've got to tell you is dangerous. Because sites with planning are never ever going to be cheap, because they're in the public domain. The imbalance between the supply of them, sites ready to go with planning, and the demand for them, it's so out of kilter. And look, I trade quite a lot of my sites now, yeah? I've been through phases. Years ago, I used to build everything. Now, and certainly going forward, however much I actually carry on doing this, because I'm sort of winding it all down, I will probably flip most things. And the reason being, every time, and this is worth saying as well, because I know there were people that talk about, I've got an off-market site and it's got planning. It can't be off-market with planning. That's ridiculous. Off-market doesn't mean it's not on with an estate agent. It means it's not in a public domain, and you're one-on-one, ideally with the vendor, and you're not getting involved in stupid competition. So, every time I submit a plan, every time I submit a planning application, I'll get 10 letters from people, right, that just monitor the
planning portal.
Similar. Every time I that's when I submit a planning application, right? And it's all bullshit, most of it. Oh, we've seen, and a lot of it's agents, right? Just trying to get a foot in the door on the deal. Every time I get planning, I get a whole load of other letters, yeah? And, for me now, unless I really like the site, I really like the scheme. There's something about it that means I want to build it, right? And I have still got a few of those in the pipeline actually that I will build, even though I say I'm not going to build anymore, right? Right. But other than that, a lot of stuff, it's like, it's too small. It's not my cup of tea. I just don't fancy it for whatever. I've tied it up right. I've had the planning value, but I just don't want to. I don't really fancy building it. I'll get a ton of offers unsolicited. I'm not even trying to flip it. I'm not even trying to sell it. I'll just get so of course, I'll entertain those offers and I'll end up selling stuff with planning. And what happens? Because look, as you know, I do stuff right. I know what the real value is. Because whether I'm when I'm tying something up, whether I'm planning on building it or not, you've got to be buying stuff at the right price. So I'm all over it value wise. I'm all over it cost wise. I know exactly, I pretty much know what I'm going to get planning for. So I know exactly what the proper value is on a proper margin, right? And just for everyone out there, in my opinion, and it'd be interesting to see what you look at, a proper margin, in my opinion, is at least 20% of GDV.
Yeah,
25% profit on cost tends to work out about the same, right? That is a minimum sensible, proper profit margin, in my opinion. Yeah,
and that is where it should be, but it's not always there.
Yeah, well, exactly. Well, we'll come on to that because it'd be interested to see what you look at and what people fund stuff on. If I'm flipping something, I know what people buy stuff off me for, right? I know what the proper values are. I know what the proper costs are. I know what the land value is based on those sensible margins that I've given you. And I know what people end up buying stuff off me for. Yeah. And I reverse it and engineer it. So, I don't end up with residual land value. I can see what the residual profit margin is. Yeah. So I know that there are people buying stuff on like 9, 10, 11, 12%, which is crazy. If people were going to do that, they better be absolute shit hot builders. So they manage everything properly. They know exactly what they're going to build it for. Right? They assume they're going to build it for X. They're going to build it for X. And it doesn't matter how shit hot a builder you are, to be quite honest. Well, what are you going to do if like materials go up 25% and like doesn't matter who you are, even if you're Barrett's, you can't you got to pay what you got to pay. If bricks cost X, you got to pay X.
Yeah.
Right. So I mean, it is pretty much almost impossible to properly fix your build costs. We could go on to fixed price conversation about fixed price construction contracts, which pretty much, in my opinion, don't really exist ever. You can't really fix them because the second something changes, the whole thing's out the window.
I think that the last point is the most thing that they probably want to hope, because everything else is so wishy-washy. The chances that build costs are going to remain the same. I think just going back to your initial point, rising house prices, rising property prices, that typically gets most people out of the shit. And I think that they just wish for that, and that happens, they'll pull off a good deal in the end. I've funded stuff with a 10% on GDV margin. That's the tightest it's been. It was with a developer that the lender really liked, and they'd already done something together, and they saw that they run a good tight ship. It was a good property, good asset, and a good location, and they decided to take the risk. But
how did that work out?
Tight, yeah. No. I mean, a lot of developers over the last 18, 24 months have struggled significantly because of the rising build costs, and anyone that's taken on and the stagnation in the market, anyone in terms of sales and exits, anyone that's taken on anything leverage wise, 70% and above is struggling. 15% on GDV is where most lenders feel comfortable.
Is it?
Yeah, a lot of them. That's that's determined to be good enough. The one place that it can hit you, though, is when you do the quantity surveyor report or the valuation report. And if the residual land value comes down because they're working off 20% on GDV, that means the developer would need to put in a little bit more cash, and that de-risks it for the lender, and that makes them feel a little bit more comfortable to do it. Yeah. But 15% on GDV is usually where a lot of developers send me stuff. Sometimes it comes in at 12, 13, 14, and I tell them, look, this is super tight. We'll probably get it funded for you, but you just got to be super careful, especially taking on high leverage. That is something more and more that I've just been very, very cautious about. Because, for example, I've got one client who's doing 6 detached homes in Essex, and she's great. And she's doing a joint venture with the landowner. Landowner's contributing a large, like deferring his interest in the site. And there was a point where he wasn't going to do that, and he was being quite difficult. He was an older gentleman. And there was one point that we were going to have to take on a mezz piece to be able to pay him off now and walk off in the sunset. And she was very keen to do it. Say very keen. She was willing to do it. She'd been working on it for so long. She'd invested so much cash. She'd got the planning. She's got the adjacent site. So he couldn't get exactly the same scheme without, and time was on his side, but she just so invested time, effort, energy, and this is why people probably overpay for sites, because they've done so much on it that they just want to get it done.
Yeah.
So she was going to do it. I did warn her about it. I did say, like, if you do this, your build costs and your builds, like your schedule has to be on point. Your exits and your sales have to be flawless, because there's no room after that. Either you plow loads more cash in, which you don't have, it seems, and nobody's going to give it to you because there's no margin in this deal anymore, or you're going to suffer, and the units are going to get taken off you and put into auction. So yeah,
did she do that one?
Yeah, she managed to, after like 3 months of negotiation back and forth with the landowner, we managed to get it done out of the JV. So she's at 60% LTGDV instead of the 70-75% that I could have got. I got all the offers, so people were willing to do it. We got to that point, but even I've managed to jump on a call with the solicitor as well, who was actually quite good, and warned her off and said, no, let's just stay on this path. Let's just try and get it done. Basically, what happened was the landowner's is 8 years old. The son flew back from Australia. And I was like, whoa, what's this you've agreed? That we're not having that. And then suddenly kind of tore up all the agreement. And then it went back into a negotiation. And then not only did he went one step further, that they were like, no, you're kind of railroading us into this now. And actually, we don't want to speak to you other than via solicitors. And she was like, oh my God, this is getting worse. But she managed to claw it back. And we ended up getting it done. But again, so it's a bit of a funny one. I don't mind arranging these things. This is my job. We're all adults. There's nothing illegal about what we do. But I do, like, anybody wants to take a land without planning, through planning, and buy it on a bridge.
Oh man.
The first thing I tell them is, like, I will do this for you, but you have to understand that a 12-month bridge is probably, possibly, highly likely not going to be enough, and you're going to have to think of that. And so you've got to factor all of these costs in, and be sure that you want to do it. So far, fortunately, no one's actually got me to do it, because I think I put them off well enough. But yeah, people do come to me for that sort of thing.
And again, just
I'll arrange it for them, by the way.
Just for the, because remember, this is meant to be a little bit educational. I know, I think there was people out there that used to teach or say, buy stuff on Rightmove and then finance it with a bridging loan. I mean, Jesus Christ, development stuff I'm talking about.
Yeah.
That is, people honestly don't do that unless you are an absolute shit hot planning genius, right? And it's super cheap, and unlikely to be super cheap if it's on Rightmove.
Yeah, exactly. You just got to be really careful. I mean, I think the problem that I've got is because I know enough about this stuff. I genuinely have a conscience as well. And I do want to solve the affordable housing crisis. And, and also any sign of any good business is repeat business. Yeah. So if they go and do one deal, plow it all into a land without planning, spend 3 years and there's no margin and all that sort of, I'm never going to see them again. So I'd rather give them some half decent advice, and hopefully we'll be able to do much more in the future.
Yeah. I mean, I like you, Sam.
Likewise, Paul.
So it's worth talking about. We sort of gone off on a bit of a weird tangent, and like obviously it would have become apparent now, right? You're a finance broker,
yes,
right? And I never used to like finance brokers, right? Seriously, and I never used to use them. Actually, I used one once for something, right? But other than that, you are the only one I've ever used. Yeah,
good.
And And I'll tell people why I didn't used to use them, and I'll tell them why I now do work with you, and why I think you are a good person to work with. Right? See, straight up.
Yeah.
You know I'm no bullshit, right? And I
Yeah.
wouldn't be saying this if I didn't believe it. And sadly, I'm on no commission or anything like that. But the reason
All
I
true.
never used to use finance brokers, right, is because I was always very detailed, and I think I knew what I was doing, right, in terms of development appraisals, getting all my numbers right. Now, there are finance brokers out there. There are people that use a finance broker to like do the development appraisal for them and make sure it's okay. And I mean, that's at the extreme end. But it's like, Jesus Christ, if you don't know how to do all of this stuff yourself, you shouldn't be really in development, right? But there are people that use finance brokers because they don't know how to do stuff properly, right? Seriously, there are people like that. So I never use, I didn't need a finance broker to do that for me, right? So that was one reason I thought I never really wanted to use brokers or work with brokers, right? The other reason was, and this is a big reason, people got to be really careful about this, right? A lot of them, they're just like post box, right? So you give them a development appraisal and they just punt it out all over the place, get the terms, right? And that's it. They put themselves in the middle, right? They don't do very much, right? Now it's your business, it's your sector, so you'll know much more about it than me. But that's always been my perception, right? So I just always sort of done it myself, yeah. The only two lenders I used to use, because I done all right with them and I had a relationship with them, right, was RBS and Close Brothers. When things went sideways in 2008, right, I had 5 deals on the go, developments, right. 4 of them were with RBS, 1 of them were Close Brothers, right. Well, going into the detail, and I wish it was the other way around, right, because they were all good deals. They bought them all cheap. I did a load of planning value on all of them, as is always my model. So they were super like low risk deals. Obviously, the banks run out of money. Couldn't afford to fund things, basically, because they didn't have the right. They wanted to get out of everything they can. Because of my deals were actually so good, they had a load of equity in them. They were really easy to pull the plug on. Yeah, if I'd been like, Ballymore or some massive developer that had at the time, 100% loans and getting that way, right? They couldn't pull the plug on them. Anyway, that's by the by. RBS pulled the plug on all my deals, shafted me, as they did with nearly everyone else.
Yeah.
Right? Close Brothers, fantastic bank, did not, stuck with me. It all worked out all right in the end. Got the thing finished, got the thing sold, made a few quid, everyone got paid back and all the rest of it, right? So Close Brothers, fantastic bank, right? So credit is where it's due.
Always.
RBS, diabolical, right?
Yeah.
The point is, I always used to just stick with those banks that I knew and relationship and all the rest of it. But now more recently, I started doing stuff, a bit of talking to you, and I was wrong. Actually, well, I was definitely wrong to use fucking RBS. That's for sure, right? And I won't be doing that again. Well, and actually, was I wrong? I don't know. If you've got a really good relationship with a really good bank, and I'm gonna say, certainly in my experience, Close Brothers is the one I would recommend the most. Actually, I'm going to have to get older Close Brothers, see if they'll
good.
They'll sponsor this podcast. Yeah. Actually, it's not like it's not. So they really are good in my opinion. Yeah, and I'm sure there's probably some other good ones as well, right? But of course, I don't know them all. But you probably do know them all. So that is the other reason probably to use a broker, because they're in the market. They know who's doing what. They know who's giving terms for what. They'll know who's good and who's not so good. And of course, I'm never going to really know that unless I'm out there, doing it every day of the week. So there actually is a role for brokers,
especially in this day and age. Since 2008, there's been a huge influx of new lenders into the market, new investors and lenders, and this money comes from new challenger banks that have been set up, private debt, private equity, family offices, all entering the market, which didn't really used to exist before 2008. There was maybe a handful of high street banks. There were some building societies, and they would fund most things. Of recent years, the need for a good broker, especially in specialist finance, that understands bridging, understands development, understands investment, I think has value, has huge value. And the reason why I set up Mary Oaks Property Finance in 2021 is because I was heading up an origination department for Hilltop. And I saw about 750 applications for loans in the final 18 months before I stepped down from my position. And I just saw the poor quality of half of these applications. It's exactly what you said. Developer would send some raw information over, and it would literally just come to us exactly like that, almost with a forward. They didn't even bother deleting the FW on the email. And then we'd have to spend, a few hours picking it apart, finding out what information is there, asking for more information. And sometimes these loan applications for 5, 10, 15, 20 million. And I was like, how do you expect us to make a credit decision based on such a vague application? So it was quite clear. And then there are like a handful of good brokers, but there were few and far between out of those 750 applications. Some really good borrowers, some really good assets.
Oh, so
really
hang on. So this is interesting, actually. So I hadn't thought about that, actually. So because you were effectively working for a lender, really. So you were actually seeing all this stuff that was sent to you from brokers.
That's literally how Mary Oaks started. I went to the principal, Paul, at Hilltop, and I said, look at all these great deals and look how crap their applications are. But look, this one's, we could have, and we can't do this one because we don't do hotels. We can't do this one because they need low leverage. We can't do this one because it's under £3 million, but they're all good deals. And the relationship was with the developer and the broker, not so much the lender. The broker would be able to go from bridging to development to term, and on to the next deal and the next deal. Whereas lenders were, they say they're relationship driven, but for a cheaper rate and a better security package, developers rightfully would probably think about using somebody else, but they would always stick with their broker. And whilst as a lender, if you head up an origination department, your job is to befriend lots and lots of brokers. I've got nothing against brokers, but I prefer spending my time with developers. So having seen the poor quality of applications, thinking that going back to my estate agency days as well, being able to broker things back and forth, I just thought it makes more sense to set up a brokerage. I nearly did it with the guys at Hilltop, but one thing came to another. They were building a credit business, and so I just spun off and did my own thing and set up Mary Oaks.
Very good. All right. Well, that's probably as good a place as any to wrap it up. But I suppose a good final little lesson might be a bit like, my whole view on the planning applications, for example, is you've got to, not only have you got to know everything right and do it right, you have got to present it right. Because
absolutely, 100%.
Jesus Christ, you're either, planners either looking at something thinking, these people might be creating some buildings that we have to look at for the next 100 years, or you're a lender expected to give someone £1 million, 5, 10, 20, 30 million quid. And it's like, Jesus Christ, if you can't even present it properly, you know what I mean? It's not a good sign, is it?
It's not a good sign. You don't get a second chance at a first impression. So when I get this application as a lender, I'm firstly thinking either the broker doesn't know what they're doing or the developer doesn't know what they're doing. And then I'm thinking, well, actually, this developer sent it to this broker. So it's going to be the developer that doesn't know what he's doing, because surely if he knew what he was doing, he sent it to a decent broker that would send me the good information. So it's you straight away off on the back foot. So then you do a little bit of digging. You say, oh, okay, he met this person. He's just sent it to me. And it might be all right in the end. But certainly you don't want to start off a relationship where you're thinking that these guys know what they're doing. You want to be able to start off well, go in optimistically, and then uncover the skeletons in the closet a little bit later.
Very good. Okay, mate. Well, look, thanks a lot for coming.
Thank you very much for having me.
Where can people find you?
All social media platforms, from LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram, or you can find us at our website, www.maryoaks.com, and or email me at sam@maryoaks.com directly.
Thanks, mate.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for tuning in to Inside Property Development. Please remember to like and subscribe. Do join us every week, where we'll be speaking to house builders, developers, experts, planners, and everyone involved in trying to get more much needed housing created the right way. We'll learn together how we can collaborate rather than fight, and by working together, we can all help create better places, spaces and homes, and a much more beautiful world.